Hello, everyone, and welcome to week 8 of BUTI Intermissions. It's our final week, and by now you probably know me. I'm Nicole Wendell, Director of Education, and joining me today is Teddy Abrams, Music Director of the Louisville Orchestra. Hello, Teddy. Thanks for being with us today. How are you?
Great to be here. I'm doing just fine.
Great.
Yeah.
So, how have your quarantine times been? What have you been doing this whole summer?
Well, it has actually been a pretty busy summer in a very different way. I'm sure everybody has, restructured their time and their approach to life, and I'm certainly in that category. And it was actually supposed to be jam-packed with concerts starting pretty much the second I ended the season here in Louisville. I was supposed to just, run around from one show to the next almost all summer long. I think there was, I don't know, something like 18 different weeks or 17 different weeks all in different places.
Wow.
It was going to be a really, really busy performing schedule. And then, boom, of course, everything was canceled. And I thought for about a day that, well, this will be great. I'll take all the time I've really been hoping to take my whole life to really just think and go, maybe I don't know, I'll go to the the steppes of Central Asia or something like that and just read and be offline. But that lasted about 24 hours. And then um, well, when you're in a role like mine, where you're actually working for an organization and you have a responsibility to the organization as opposed to being an independent musician, where the primary responsibility is to yourself. There are different considerations, and it's obviously this is not a value judgment at all. It's just a different way of doing things, and so a lot of my work centers around keeping the Louisville Orchestra vital and alive and healthy and leading in a very non-musical sense. So the vast majority of my time has been extended to really working with the organization here. And I consider the job of a music director actually to be a civic job. So just like a university president or a director of a major museum or something like that has a role in society and role in their community that extends beyond whatever they're hanging up in the museum or whatever they're playing that week at the orchestra or whatever the academic year might look like at a university. My role, especially in a time with a lot of civic challenges, needs to be one where I'm involved in things that are really quite outside the normal sphere of what a conductor would be doing, or honestly, what a musician would be doing. And so it's been a fascinating summer of learning and trying to find whatever my role is in all of this, and trying to make a difference and trying to help the city when it really needs a lot of help. And so that was not what I was expecting to do. I mean, it's always been something I've wanted to do, honestly, and it's been a mission for me since I was a little kid, actually, to take music as a starting place, but to actually do something with it as opposed to just performing. Not that there's anything wrong with just performing, but I've always felt this need, especially when it comes to large civic organizations like orchestras, to do that. And now finally, I didn't want it to happen this way, but I've had the opportunity to do that. And it's been weirdly frightening and also very satisfying in a lot of ways because you realize just how much you have to lose, but you also have so much to change and to grow in a time when you can actually do that kind of thing. And, those opportunities are very rare to change the way people think and the way you do things. And this is the first time in my life where there's been a wholesale change to that very effect and that point. I guess this is a really long answer to what I've been doing in the summer, but it's been a really, really, really long summer. And
Yes, yes, it has.
it's weird because time has moved so quickly and so slowly at the same time, which actually reminds me a lot of music. The sense of time when you're making music is not at all linear. Especially as a conductor,
Right.
one thing I tell people is that you are the time. The time is you. In other words, when you're conducting, it's what you're doing is dealing with time. You're dealing with, the flow of time, the pacing of time, the sense of the pacing of time, which is not always the exact same thing. But
Right.
as a conductor, you're thinking about things that are in the immediate the midterm, the future, and the past, and you're dealing with that. So actually, this summer has felt very much like a weird musical summer, just from the macro sense, I guess, the very meta sense, because time is
Yeah,
like flowing in multiple ways at the same time, which is exactly what it's like, especially when you're kind of dealing with a large scale piece like a Mahler symphony. So there's my
very
answer.
true.
That's my big answer to the question.
I love it. I think it's a great big answer with a lot of moments in it that I want to touch on. And first I want to talk a little bit about, you know, Louisville's kind of been an epicenter for this unrest, and there's a lot of protesting going on. Are protests still going on?
Oh yeah, yeah. The protests are absolutely going on. In fact, there was just an order, which it sounds crazy, this deep into the current social change and the reshaping of the nation, hopefully for the better. But there was just an order last week that the protests can no longer take place in the streets. They have to be either in sidewalks or in designated areas or with a permit. But up until
Wow.
last week, there were protests actually in the streets, unpermitted, of course, and going up and down, people driving often the wrong way on the streets, which was, I mean, it was an incredible thing to witness. I'm sure many people have seen similar things in their city, but because of the Breonna Taylor case, there is a particular sense of anticipation that I think many other cities don't have. I think most other large American cities uh, have a sense that they're working things out or dealing with things, or maybe not dealing with them as effectively, but that there is some kind of trajectory. Whereas in Louisville, because we now have the last major case in this movement right now that's captured so much public attention, and there's no decision yet as to what happens with the officers involved, that there's a sense of kind of suspended animation where we're all just waiting for that decision. And not only is there not a decision, we don't even have a timeline for when that could come out.
Right,
And I mean, it could
right.
be in 1 hour, or and it could be in weeks. And many cities that had downtowns boarded up, or a lot of businesses closed because they were afraid of either violence or looting or whatever. They've mostly moved on, or at least they've reopened or taken down boards in a lot of ways. I know Portland still has ongoing issues. Many cities have some ongoing issues, but our entire downtown is boarded up because people are just waiting for that moment when an official decision is made by the Attorney General of the state. And I think there's a sense that regardless of what the decision is, and most people know what the decision is likely to be, it's not going to be one that people accept readily, and there's probably going to be a lot more unrest. Of course, we don't
Right.
want that to happen, but we're all waiting. We don't know when, and we don't know what, and we don't know how, and that creates an underlying anxiety that I've never quite experienced, because we don't know what's going to happen to our town, and people are just using their imaginations, and they're not taking them to a very good place. I can tell you that.
I'm sure that's true. How do you, I mean, it might seem like distant ends of the earth, but I can make the connection in my head, and I'd love to hear you make the connection of the orchestra as as a real community member, and how this everything that's happening in the country, everything that's happening in Louisville, everything that's happening with the population in the downtown, how does this affect the orchestra? How do things change?
You
Yeah,
have to, I mean, you have to assume a role of being there. You have to show up and stand up for what you believe in, and then follow through with your beliefs as an artist. And I think everybody has a different way of doing that. I think it's a little like education. When I say there's no one way to do educational work. Some people are amazing one-on-one teachers, but freak out about talking to a class of kids. Other people love coming up with elaborate stories and presenting and doing theatrical stuff. But if you actually, have them do, maybe a lesson or something like that, it might not be very effective. Everybody has a different way of doing it. Um,
hmm,
and it's actually the same thing with what it means to, I think, be in a situation where activism and change are required, and people have to speak up, or have to use their voice and platform in some way. But there's no one right way to do it. And I think people have to find out what way they can make their voice heard that resonates with who they are. Because fraudulent and posing behavior is sometimes very destructive. It's destructive both outwardly because you're not being honest about what it is you're trying to advocate for, but also it's destructive in an inward sense, because you're not being who you are. You're putting on a way of being that doesn't align with who you are as a human being. And I think it's very important that everybody takes this time to think about what it is they can truly offer the planet. And as musicians, we have remarkable things that we can do, still with a pretty wide breadth of opportunities. For me, though, it's about saying if you are in a city like this and you're a part of an organization that has the city's name in it, then you have to stand up for what your city really needs. And there are so many levels of inequality in society, and we shouldn't be adding to it. That's the big thing with me. That if we're creating yet another system that just divides the people that have and the people that don't have, which is the underlying element of so much of this. Yes, I mean, obviously,
Right.
the specific situation of Black Lives Matter, the specific racial discriminatory issue and police brutality issue is critically important to understand and to thoroughly immerse yourself in and learn about. Yes, but underlying that and most of the evils and the problems in our society are the systemic inequalities, the economic inequalities, the way we set up a society that some people, glide right through life and other people find a giant wall in front of them every way they turn. And if we
Right.
are in the process of building the wall even higher, then we're really not doing what we should be doing as human beings, but not what we should be doing if we're taking the name of our city in our job title, as in music director of the Louisville Orchestra. So I see it as essentially my sworn role. It's my duty as a knight of the order of orchestral musicians or whatever it is, to break down the walls of that inequality. And of course, music is the most equal and democratic way of producing art, culture, language, whatever it is. It's the boundaryless system. There's no ability to stop it. It's one of the reasons why when you take out the whole practice of music and you just look at it in its most kind of abstract form, it is incredibly diverse and inclusive on its own. Yes, concert halls are not incredibly diverse and
Right.
inclusive.
Right.
Orchestras are not incredibly diverse and inclusive, but the language of music is transmuted exclusively through a system that you can't stop, which is your ears. And there's a reason I always remind people, just biologically, your ears are hardwired to provide critical information about the world. There's a reason you can't turn them off. You can't turn your ears off. You can close your eyes and not put something in your mouth and plug your nose, whatever, but you can't turn your ears off. It's hardwired to a lot of systems in the brain that relate to how we perceive ourselves, understand danger around us. It's critically important. Now, that's all just like background theory, but the whole point is that music as a language freely flows. It's always freely flowed. It's the one thing we can't stop. It's not a good that can be bought and sold. It just exists. And when people hear something that they like or love or just can't get out of their ears, it's carried through regardless of what culture or background produced it. And
Right.
if we're not serving that higher purpose, then what on earth are we doing? You know what I mean? Like if we're not working towards that goal of allowing the free flowing of music, which is what it wants to do, it wants to get out there, then we're actively fighting our very interests. So that's what our role is. Now, I know that's really broad and theoretical, but I think a lot of times people leap to something that's just it's something that they feel like they can do, but they skip the theory part. The theory part's important because if you don't think about it as an artist, then you're just putting patches on stuff. Yes, you can reprogram your whole season the next day after you find out about a movement, but that's not the same thing as doing the theoretical work to think about why
Right.
we got to a place like this and who we are and what we can actually do as human beings in the broader, more kind of holistic sense of what our capability bring that up.
I love to hear you speak so passionately about this, and I feel the same, and we at BUTI feel the same. And I know that you have done a lot of work in the community, speaking of community and the orchestra and being part of that and standing up for that. And you also talk often about music being the most mobile of art and artistic endeavors. How have you used that mobility either yourself or within the orchestra with members of the orchestra to get out into the community and really be part of that?
Well, we play all over the place under normal circumstances. It was one of the first things we did when I got here. I thought, we have to get out of our concert hall downtown. Not that we don't love that, but we need to find people where they are. And,
Hmm.
concert hall is a wonderful place in many ways, but it's also incredibly problematic. I actually don't go to a lot of concerts in concert halls. I get super anxious going in. I don't like the environment. I know that sound. I probably shouldn't be saying this on a medium like this, but I think about it a lot as a consumer. Where are the places I like listening to
Sure.
music? And
Yeah,
I'll tell
right.
you a lot. There are a lot of places I love listening to live music, and the experience that we've decided is the standard is not often the one that I find most appealing. I
Sure.
love um, house concerts. I love big music festivals, like big rock festivals and things like that. I think it's so much fun to go to, well, maybe not like Coachella, but other more intimate ones. I think there are a lot of places where I actually do. I love, awesome, like really, cool vibe jazz clubs, things like that. I think a lot about space and people in a community have so many instances where they're already connected and where they already feel like they have their own part of the community that belongs to them. And our whole idea originally was to take the orchestra and to put ourselves in those very places. So it was both the orchestra and just me personally. There was no place we wouldn't show up. I think on
Right.
day two, the mayor of Louisville asked me to come, and there was a big. They shut down the streets in some of the neighborhoods out on the west end, which it's a diverse neighborhood but predominantly black. And he said, "Will you come and play music there?" And said, "Absolutely." So I took my keyboard and we every 5 blocks plop the keyboard down, find power somewhere, and I'd play for people. That was day two, and we just kept doing that. Whether it was taking the whole orchestra in our neighborhood series, which was not just designed to go to where the richest people live, which is what a lot of series like that do. They just go out to the even richer suburb than where they were already playing. That's great because you need to raise money and you need to sell tickets, yes. But if you want to build audiences, it's about building relationships, and you can't build relationships if you don't actually meet anybody. I mean,
Right.
I don't particularly love using politics as a model, but anybody will tell you the best ideas do not win. People don't vote on the best ideas. And you know what? They vote with their money when it comes to what we do. They don't donate to and buy tickets to the best thing just objectively because you played the best, Jupiter Symphony or the best, concerto, whatever it was.
Yeah.
They donate because they know you and they like you and they have a personal relationship. And to do that, uh, you have to find them. So, I mean, I can tell you the list goes on and on and on. I do it myself. I feel like you have to live by your own beliefs. And if I tell people that they need to get out into the community and share their music, then I better be. So I think there was a year when I visited like 30 different schools. I'd go in and work, and then I kept doing that year after year. Now I adopt several schools and go out regularly to those places and work with the orchestra. It's a holistic program. The education stuff is really, really emphasized because that's if you want to change the future, you obviously have to start there. People always say we need more
Right.
diverse audiences. Yeah, but by the time people make purchasing decisions in their 30s and older, it's really hard to change minds.
That's true.
Brands hit you when you're young. Brands are smart. The corporate side is smart. We're stupid. They're smart. They don't advertise to people making a first time purchasing decision for something that could be a lifelong relationship when they're in their 40s or 50s. They start young, and we have to do the same.
Right.
So
Right.
that's I go on and on about this, but yes, that's how you do it. You show up, and it's in a lot of ways. And I can tell you, I mean, even recently, when the protests started and there were events taking place, I go all over the place. Be as safe as I can, socially distanced, yes, but showing up when a friend of mine would say I'm having a rally or I'm doing this, I'd go. And I've found all kinds of fascinating people and relationships. I can tell you, I heard a young poet was kind of I don't know, freestyling or doing something at one of these events. I was so overwhelmed by it. We actually had a July 4 concert. I invited her to
Hmm.
compose a new poem, and she recited it with the orchestra when we did it. If you don't show up to things, you're not going to meet people and find those relationships. Those things happen every day when you're out in your community, especially in a role like mine. You know,
Right.
that's supposed to be my job.
So one of the things that is really important to BUTI and while students are there to build this and empower them to do it is to be in their community and be sort of, you know, somebody that connects, right, from one person to another. And in these times, it's difficult, but in normal times, what advice would you give to our students who are, either in high school or taking college auditions to meet, to get out in their community and meet people and start to learn how to build these relationships with their authentic selves?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main thing is not thinking of that kind of work as secondary. I think we've made such a hierarchy for what it means to be successful. And, the biggest success is going around playing concertos with the Berlin Philharmonic and at Carnegie Hall and all that stuff. And then there's like all these other layers down. And we've gotten
Yeah,
far away from the kind of more sacred role of what we do as musicians, of literally bringing people together, like that, of creating something authentic and meaningful, uh, and dynamic, of that, the creation part and then the communal part. Those are the two things that we do as musicians. All that other stuff, that's not important. Let's face it, that's not actually that important. In the end, when you're dying, you're not going to say, oh, if I just had one more solo engagement with the Pittsburgh Symphony, I'd give anything to have that extra week back to play the Mozart, fifth violin concerto again. That's not it.
yeah,
People should think about that, because we are really attracted to this model that has been created for what success is, that often contradicts the very essence of what the role of the musician is in society. It's to create something, as I said, authentic and meaningful, that has the opportunity to give us a window into either humanity or the world around us. There's no In that definition, there is no specific orchestra or concert hall or management agency or anything, period. And part
right.
part two is the communal component, and that idea that we bring folks together, whether it's online. I mean, that can be in a more abstract sense, or in person. People need those experiences. We are a very, we're a tribal kind of species. We immediately break down into our own ideas, and generally human beings, when they're not around each other to have dialogue or commune, they go off into a certain direction, and they become more and more protective of their own sense of self. And
Right.
they become, isolated, and we know what that means. Music is one of the really powerful ways of cutting through that, because shared, meaningful experiences have a deep, deep effect on the health of society. And that's two people, 100 people, 1,000 people. So I'm not denigrating the experience of playing the Hollywood Bowl by any means, because yes, you just allowed 15,000 people to commune. I'm not denigrating Tanglewood. It could be 30,000 people on Day of Music if they still have that, or Parade on Tanglewood on Parade.
Tanglewood on Parade, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I'm not denigrating that at all. I'm just saying that it's all part of the same kind of sworn duties as a musician. And you think about some of the people that are icons to us, the great composers of the past, the great musicians, and the range of ways that they connected with people. It's the authenticity about it. It's the drive to create. Those are the things that we remember. Nobody sits there remembering one person's successful show, or often we don't even know who on earth they were performing with or conducting. Back when Mozart was alive, there wasn't even a Vienna Philharmonic to conduct. When Beethoven was
Right.
around, most of the musicians were employed by their own specific patrons for almost all of the year, except for 6 weeks in November and December, when they could do benefit concerts, and that's how he premiered most of his compositions. Let's not forget that Beethoven wasn't on tour playing in stadiums. He wasn't. And the sense of community and what you can do is really different. I mean, people forget this. Like, it's the same thing. It's, when people blow up history to make it whatever they want. So this is all to say to all these young musicians, hopefully listening. Don't let anybody tell you that doing something meaningful and authentic isn't big enough or not right enough or whatever it is. Do it because it's the right thing to do, and because it will fill your soul as an artist. And so don't make a hierarchy. If you get into an orchestra, education is not an extra thing. Doing community work is not an extra thing. It's not worse than playing a Mahler symphony. It's just as important. And you know what? It might be far more meaningful because you'll be able to craft it and shape it the way you want.
Right.
There you go. I get very upset about that issue, as you can see. Not upset. I get passionate about that because it's so fundamentally important.
Yeah, I agree. And, part of that is also, you mentioned your time in the schools, your time getting out there and being with young people. And in every single one of these conversations, I think every single one, if not every single one, almost all of them, this concept of mentorship has has been a through line. And you had a very influential mentor when you were young in Michael Tilson Thomas.
Yeah.
And tell me about the birth of that relationship and how you got connected, how he shaped you, and maybe even how his work with you shaped him. Or
Well,
yeah.
I was both very lucky and also uh, I guess in the right place at the right time, which is luck. And then it's also a relationship that I really treasured and worked to make sure that we maintain that. And the music world is one of the few places where you have that dynamic between a teacher and student. That it used to be almost all trades were like that, where you'd find the master,
Right.
whatever, stonecutter or mason and tailor, and you'd have that personal relationship which would be outside of your family unit, and it would be a very important part of learning your trade, but also there'd be a human connection that's not mechanized.
Right.
um,
Right.
we're the last industry, I think, with that system so much in place. It's like a medieval kind of thing. And I have been so fortunate that not only MTT but a number of other mentors have been lifelong family to me, essentially. And there's no replacement for that. And I met MTT because I actually saw my first orchestra concert when I was 9 years old. I did not grow up in a family that went to orchestra concerts regularly. I mean, I was playing music very seriously, and that's why they decided to take me. But it wasn't the other way around. It wasn't because we always listened to classical music or that we went all the
Right.
time and then I wanted to play it. They took me because I liked it. And I'd never seen a great orchestra like the San Francisco Symphony. I mean, I guess I had the context for it through movies and hearing that, but I'd never seen a live
Sure.
orchestra like that. And I mean, I think it's just a little reminder of the power of what we do. When I heard that sound, it was all Gershwin concert. I remember that. Garrick Olson was playing. I think he was
Wow.
playing the Concerto in F. There was American in Paris, a lot of things like that. But it
Sure.
was just after the first 5 seconds, I said, "That's what I want to do." I was 9 years old. I said, "That's what I'm going to do the rest of my life." And I decided I'd write MTT a letter and tell them that, and ask for conducting lessons and go all out. It was like a 7-page letter or something like that on note card after note card, all like they
Right.
were
Right. Right.
notes, and I would have to number the pages, and I mean it was crazy. I only ever did that. Well, I guess I did that twice. I was obsessed with Lindsay Lohan and the Parrot Trap, so I sent her a really long letter, and she didn't respond.
Rude.
She did actually. I'll tell you what, she did. 5 years later, I got a form letter because I guess her career had kind of tanked before Freaky Friday, but and then it came back. She did fine. But anyway, MTT did respond, and a week later, I got this letter that was, it's a letter that changed my life. I have it hanging up in my room because it's a reminder that MTT did what was a small thing. He responded to a letter, but it's like the butterfly flapping its wings can cause the hurricane, and this changed the whole course of my life because it meant that this person who incredibly respected, famous composer conductor, took the time to write to a totally unknown 9-year-old on the merits of my endless letter and said, "You can do this. Here are some ways,"
Yeah.
and said, "Please keep in touch." And so I did. And I got into the youth orchestra the next year. And that in San Francisco, that's a big deal because San Francisco Symphony Youth
Right.
Orchestra is a part of the symphony. It's really good. And at that time, I think it's changed a little bit, and it's still incredible. It's just as great as it ever was. But at that time, it was a rather old youth orchestra. Like there were a lot of college age kids in it because it was so good. I mean, it was better than
Whoa.
virtually any college orchestra around. And so I got into the clarinet section. There was a senior at the San Francisco Conservatory of Music, one Stanford student, and a sophomore at the San Francisco Conservatory of Music. That was the clarinet section plus me. It was incredibly
Wow.
weird. And I started going to concerts regularly at the San Francisco Symphony, and always MTT would ask me to come backstage and chat and tell him what I thought of the concert and talk about the music for a little bit. And every time he'd make time for me, like even with all the people running around backstage, it and it of course gave me a huge sense of this is possible. And then I had kind of a dramatic moment with a change in teachers, and yeah, it's a long story. I'll write them in my memoirs one day, which may be only known to me, maybe my own memoir for myself. But it was pretty dramatic, and my parents didn't really know what to do because not being musicians, not being in this world, they didn't really know how to deal with it.
Hmm.
When a situation kind of goes south. And so they reached out to Alistair Neal, who was the music director of the youth orchestra and the assistant conductor of the San Francisco Symphony. And Alistair was so incredible about this. He said, "You know what? I think this is the perfect time." I was 12 at the time. So this is the perfect time for you to actually meet with Michael and talk about all this stuff and see what he thinks. So we arranged a meeting, and here I was, 12 years old. My parents came with me, went to Michael's house, and we talked, and I played some piano for him and played some clarinet, and he basically said, "Look, here's what I really think you need to do." And he set me up with some incredible teachers, including something that like no 12-year-old is lucky to have. I had like a score reading teacher who like
Wow.
would teach me ear training, score reading on the piano, all that kind of stuff, theoretical work, music history, and just got me on this incredible track. And then a couple years later, when I was 14, he invited me to, to come conduct. And you just
Wow.
these are opportunities that won't. I know how lucky I am to have it. I hope I did him proud by working my butt off prepared, and in my work now, I try and honor that legacy of what he did for me. I try and pass that on, and maybe I miss a couple here and there, but if somebody writes to me, no matter what the request is, I try and get back to them. I try and offer them real advice, and be a good steward and citizen of our music world here, because he did that for me. I'll never forget that.
I'm sure it plays a part too in your teaching and your mentorship and your community work, and I'm sure that's always with you.
Yeah.
We have a question. We have a question from a student, but I'm going
Oh,
to frame it a little bit. Um,
exciting.
so very exciting. So this is a question from Marco Jimenez, who is a composer, pianist, was with us for a couple summers, would have been with us this summer again. He's from Florida, St. Petersburg. And so to frame his question, you are kind of versatile. You are a clarinet player, you're a pianist, you're a composer, you obviously have this huge conducting career. And Marco wants to know what advice you would give to young musicians who are interested in piano composing and conducting, but aren't totally sure on what to focus the most.
That's a really, really good question. And especially in this day and age, there are so many opportunities open to us that I think you don't need to focus on any one thing. I've always described it as a system that feeds itself. And what you'll have to do is you'll have to definitely devote some mental energy to one thing or another at any given time, depending on what's on your plate. But I've always found that these things support each other. The work I do as a pianist feeds right into conducting, which feeds right into composing. I mean, I often finish a composition project and then need to conduct something, a week later, and I'll look at the score from a totally new perspective because I've just been, on Sibelius selecting things and thinking about orchestration or form or whatever it is I'm dealing with. And that will give me a totally different perspective into a composition. And the same goes with performing. I think one of the most important things, if you are interested in conducting or if you're a composer, is that keep performing. Don't forget what it means to get out there on a stage with eyeballs staring at you and you're trying not to mess up. Like that, you can't just be the theoretical, sky god over your musicians as they, try and play these crazy things that you've either written or that you're trying to get them to do when you conduct. You have to have connection to the people and the people that you work with. Don't lose that. There's a reason why so many of the musicians that we admire from the past did all of those things. And so I would just build the musical life that is of interest. Like, say, take on weird projects that call for your unusual skill set. If you're if you're a young conductor, put together concerts where you conduct and write a piece for it. Program a piece of music that requires continuo and learn to play the harpsichord and read figure bass if you don't know how, and play along. Combine your skill set in a unique way, because that's what the world needs. The world doesn't need a lot more conductors, and it doesn't need a lot more just people fitting into the same boxes. The world's looking for unique perspectives to develop that. This is the perfect time to be your own channel and to be your own artist. And that's what we need. We don't need armies of pianists that can all play the transcendental etudes perfectly. We don't need it. The world's not asking for that right now. They're asking for a vaccine, and they're asking for funding for the airline industry so that we still have things that fly around. But so anyway, this is an invitation. This is a great moment for that. This is a moment to be who you really are as an artist. You don't have to conform. So there you go. That's my advice. I hope it's helpful.
It's good advice. It's good advice. And I wonder if you would also speak a little bit on improvisation and the role that has played in your composition and your performing, also just in your life in general.
Yeah, I think it's one of the most important things. I think everybody should do it, regardless of how bad you think you are at it. Everybody's bad at something when they start. And do that. I never learned how to. So once you never knew how to play the piano, and that didn't stop you from playing it, so now go improvise. It's just too bad. Go learn. It's very important.
How did you learn?
I learned because nobody told me I wasn't supposed to do it until they did.
Oh.
I was lucky. I just liked doing that. That's how I started playing the piano. I was just banging on the piano, and then I kept doing that. And then I wanted to compose based on the improvisations early on. And then, of course, sadly, I had some teachers that were a little more traditional. They weren't in my kind of family teachers group, I guess you could say, but they didn't encourage that, and they didn't think that was something I should be doing. And so I kind of stopped for a while. And then I ended up at Curtis having a teacher who wasn't my primary teacher. I could say Otto-Werner Mueller, who was my primary teacher, was not really an improviser. He was many things, but improviser is not one of those things. But there was a teacher there who I essentially feel was like my primary teacher, named Ford Lallerstedt. And Ford is just unbelievable. He's like in the Dead Poet Society, Robin Williams' character. He's like that with music.
Wow.
And his classes could be about anything and everything. And he's somebody who really deeply understands the power of improvisation because he's always connected it to language. And I mean, if you speak, you're improvising. Speaking is an improvisatory technique that uses the same passageways in the brain that improvising music does. You're using syntax, you're using a desire to communicate something specific, and then the brain is able to turn that into phonemes and all kinds of other articulations. It's no different, actually. The brain acts the same way. So everybody can do it. You don't have to, every time you talk, you're not reading from a prepared statement. So if you can speak extemporaneously, you can improvise. So, but this teacher...
So it's building a vocabulary too, right? Then...
Yes, you have, but the vocabulary is already there because you're playing music. Now, the fingers might not be used to it, but the vocabulary is already there because, and remember, when you talk, them sound like Shakespeare. They don't sound like Obama. They sound like whatever they sound like. That's okay. That's totally fine. Just like when you play, it's drums. It won't have the finesse of a
Right.
finished piece in the same way that what I'm saying right now doesn't have the finesse of an Updike novel. It's just what it is. It's how you talk, and that's the same thing with improvisation. You have to be okay with that. So Dr. Lallerstedt recorded an album of a prelude and fugue in every single key, just like the Waltz Every Clavier, completely improvised. And it's
Wow.
unbelievable. Completely nothing written down. I mean, he does it. And so in our classes, actually, everything was based on improv. Our counterpoint, normally counterpoint is like paint by numbers. You add up the things and make sure.
Yes.
We had to do
Oh,
counterpoint by
yes.
ear. So he would play a canis
Wow.
firmus, and then he'd say, "Can you go to a 3+4 species on that canis firmus?" And you have to memorize it, and then go to the piano and improvise your counterpoint, all with the same rules. So
Wow.
because his whole thing was, it's doing grammar by just fill in the blanks. The grammar is not Mad Libs. That's not how you don't learn grammar by Mad Libs. That's the same thing as
Right.
doing paint by numbers counterpoint. It's all by this is way more than you probably wanted to know. But the whole thing is that contrapuntal abilities from an improvisatory perspective will inform your ability to improvise, because that's what you're doing. Your brain is judging consonance and dissonance. There's no more. It's not different than that. It's very simple. Just very hard to do. But so
Yeah.
I'd say do it in a safe place where nobody can hear you for a while. It's like the first time you ride a bike, maybe you don't want to go in Central Park where everybody can watch you falling. Like, do it somewhere safe where no one will see you. Then go out and do it with people. But your first improv, I think a lot of people, they have a very specific idea of what improv is. They think you're going to sound like Oscar Peterson the first time, or that's the standard. And if it's not that,
Right.
then they can't do
Right.
it. It's not going to be, if you don't practice jazz regularly, it will be just as likely for you to start speaking Chinese when you've never even learned it. You're not going to.
Right.
That's a whole idiomatic system. It's related. You can learn how to do it, but you have to learn that. Start with improvising the things you hear in your own head. Let your fingers wander, whatever it is. Your sense for doing it will grow. You'll figure it out. There's no wrong way to do it. You just have to do it a fair amount, like anything.
That makes sense. And I think, it's not way more than I ever would ask for. I think that's exactly the answer I was looking for, because there's 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 something to improvisation that gives artists, and especially young people, all of us, a sense of empowerment, right? A sense of agency over our own, you can show up and play. You don't have to have something prepared and perfect and ready all the time. And somebody says, "Oh, I want to hear you play." You're like, "Oh my God, do I have a box suite ready?" No, you play. You're speaking, like you
Well,
say.
and yeah, and I think everybody should have. In my ideal world, everybody should be able to improvise and also compose. And you should always have some of your own compositions ready to play for people. They would love to hear that. They love to hear your thoughts. And by quotation of a Beethoven sonata, that's great too. But people want to hear what you have to say about the world, even if it's not perfect yet and your craft is not honed to the level of Ravel. It's fine. Start and do it and try it out and see. And these days, as we were talking about before this went live, that put it online, and people, if it's horrible, people forget about it in 2 hours anyway.
Yeah.
And I just think that that's so important as an outlet for us, especially, one of the big problems in the so-called classical world is that we've all been told who the best and the greatest composers are. We've
Right.
downloaded this hierarchy, which is not a really smart way to do things. One of the things I remind people that certainly Bach and Mozart had models. They had people that they knew were great and that they respected, but they didn't have 300, 400 years of the weight of history burdened on their shoulders of especially music coming from a different continent that they were told was all
Right.
better than anything that they could come up with. They
Right.
would never have known where to start. If just imagine if um, let's just take Bach had been told that most of the best compositions were written in 13th and 14th century Ghana. You think I mean, just imagine that. Where would he even start? Like that's
Right.
what we inherit, and that's why I feel so much for all of you, um, because we that's a big burden to have on our shoulders. And I think one of the things we can do is to understand greatness in the context of a continuous flow of artistic energy. I mean, you think about most of my friends in the rock or folk world or the pop world. Yes, they've got the Beatles to deal with, and Elvis, and and Michael Jackson, but they don't have 400 years of being told here are all the greatest ones, and nothing you do can ever reach that. It's a
Right.
manageable history. It's a manageable
Right.
history to understand, and we have a very unmanageable situation. It's one of the reasons why most folk and rock and pop artists compose their own stuff, and most of them will tell you that the Who and Pink Floyd are amazing, but that doesn't stop them from writing. You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
we're burdened with 400, 500 years of being told the hierarchy. And now, not everybody, but on many people's shoulders, that just feels like that's more than 100 lifetimes worth of music to learn and to try. I don't know where my creative voice fits into this. And I'm here to say context, context, context. That is all incredible and wonderful. And the music is eternal. But the voices of today need to be heard. And we all have a voice, every one of us.
Students take note.
Yeah. I hope they're still at this point. I think they haven't checked out yet. No way to.
I'm sure that anybody watching this is so highly engaged because you're so passionate, and it's so wonderful to hear somebody talk with fervor about these topics that I think are heavy on all of our minds. And
Yeah.
there are topics that our students at BUTI talk about. I'm sure that while you were there, you were talking with your friends about, we're going down to the Tanglewood lawn, we're going to watch this concert, we're going to come back, and maybe we'll get our instruments and we'll improvise together, or maybe not. What was your time like at BUTI?
It was interesting because I was there in 2002 and 2003, and as I told you before, they were very different years.
Right.
I was a very, very young, not just age wise, even though I think it was like 14 the first year, but I was very young. Just it's weird because I was a very old soul in so many ways, but I wasn't very attuned to people my own age. Let's put it that way. So socially, I was
Sure.
very young.
Sure.
Kind of emotionally, I was all over the place. But in terms of my interactions, I had a very weird education. So when I was 11, it was a long, long story. I won't get into because it's not about BUTI. But I ended up going to community college full time, and so
Wow.
It wasn't like I was, a total, kind of alien nerd type, but I was in that direction. And for the first time in my life, when I guess it was 14 or whatever it was, I was around kids my own age, in that level of intensity. Because, I had gone to regular old elementary school until I was in fifth grade, but after that I stopped. And so then all of a sudden, kids in fifth grade are very different than high schoolers, obviously. I don't
Turns
know
out.
all of you. And so it was a tough year for me. It was a tough year emotionally. I was
Wow.
I lived at Hawthorne. So for those that have been there, Hawthorne is the one that looks like it's going to fall down. It's amazing. It's still standing upright. No insult whatsoever. I'm sure you've updated it by now, but
It has been updated and it's quite beautiful.
oh wow, I loved it. I thought it was like going to a fairy tale. I loved it. I loved how old and everything, just
Yeah.
medieval almost. So, but it was not luxurious, and I was not. No, it's not like I was used to luxury by any means, but I just wasn't used to that level of interaction with all these people, and especially my.
Right.
So it was a big learning curve for me. I learned so much. There was some crazy story. I don't know if I'm allowed to even tell them from the 2002 year, but the 2003 year was very different. I had found myself probably because BUTI helped me grow a lot as a human being.
Right.
And by 2003, I was in a very different place. And that was a game-changing year for me because that was the year I knew that I was supposed to conduct a bunch of different things. It was actually through MTT. He had asked me to come down to Florida a bunch and also go to Carnegie Halls when they opened Zankel Hall, and I was actually conducting there several times.
Wow.
It was super cool. And I told this to BUTI, and everybody was incredibly helpful. They actually helped me put together a group. We performed Appalachian Spring, the 13-instrument version. The Boston Symphony's librarian was able to get me the parts.
Wow.
The staff all came to watch it, and many of the people in that performance are still very, very close friends of mine. It was an amazing group of musicians, and that was one of the things. I mean, I guess it's really sad to be telling you these stories of all the incredible things you can do at BUTI when you're all sitting at home. and you didn't
Oh,
have that. But that was a big thing. So the first year was like this emotional growth year, and then the second year was one where I was kind of finding who I was, especially relating to other people, and I actually made friends. I didn't feel like the butt of every joke, which I'm sure I wasn't, but I felt like that because I didn't know. And also, it was before nerds were as cool as they are now. Now is like it's a much better time to be who I was then. And I'd be better. I would have been better, but it was an incredible learning experience for those two reasons. And the relationships are so important. I will say this, but not just with teachers, but with your colleagues, because they last forever in the music world. And I find so much inspiration for the people that I stay close with from that time period when I was 15, 16, 17, first couple years at Curtis. Um, those are lifelong relationships. We keep doing projects together. Yes, we jam and improvise and do crazy things. And I call on them for everything. I mean, just in this last week alone, I can tell you 4 or 5 projects that are all ongoing with people that I've been working with since I was a teenager,
wow.
and several from Tanglewood. So it's
That's something we hear again that comes back over and over again that I just, it's 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 amazing the relationships that build and sustain from BUTI.
building community is very, very hard to do after a certain place. When you're in a forced communal environment, you're forced to do everything, rehearse together, eat together, sleep in the same dorm. You can forge friendships so much faster. The ground is soft. You can plant things in there. When you get to be old like me,
Yeah.
it's really hard to make those kind of relationships. You can meet great people. You can find amazing people out there that you connect with, but that kind of lifelong sense of family can't be forged so easily. It takes the heat. You know what I mean? It's like you've got to apply that kind of very intense environment for it to happen. I'm sure you all know this, but I'm just telling all the musicians out there, especially in college too. You can still do it, but it becomes harder and harder to form those kind of bonds on that level later on. That's why those experiences are so important. And the music world is like a very large extended family, and those relationships will come to aid you in service throughout your entire life. My roommate
And
actually at
I
Curtis,
think,
I met there.
really?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. We used to jam together all the time. Harrison Hollingsworth, he's my best friend. We met it in 2003, and we were the most unlikely pairing. Harrison was already like 6'3" or 6'4", something like that, and I was small, I guess you could say. He came from, like there. I was like this Jewish kid from the Bay Area. He was, from Texas, and I just could not. The contrasts were extreme, and I don't know how, but we hit it off, and we're still best friends. And as I said, we roomed together. I mean, it was like Seinfeld almost with the different characters there,
Oh gosh.
that was where that relationship was formed. And eventually, a
Wow.
composer I brought out to be Louisville's composer in residence was a pianist at Tanglewood at that time, and I got to know him, and I eventually, you know, uh, brought him out here to have a permanent position. I mean, that's like the things you can do that time in your life. I know I sound so old. I sound like a Hemingway character at this point. Anyway, I miss it.
Hardly.
I do miss it. Like I just like when I went back 2 years ago to teach, I just all these memories came flooding back that you can only really jog by being in a place. And I
Right.
felt like 15 again. It was weird. It was surreal. And there is that it came up a lot on some of these calls about the future of BUTI. And I, yes, I really do believe that young musicians need to think about obviously the future and their careers and all this stuff. But having a place where you can just dream things up and be yourself and meet people and try things like that's so important. We're in touch with the world way too much. We need times when we're not. Like we need a magical summer
Yes.
where people don't scare you into innovating your way out of an impossible situation or learning to fundraise or building a website. Like just be yourself, be a musician, meet people, find some answers to what what life is about. Like that's what I got out of the experience there. And it was in the moment tough and scary, but I'm going on and on about this because I just think those moments are important, and they're kind of rare, and then they're gone.
But they're with you forever.
They are. They certainly are. And that magic, there are moments, like they're just little memories now and images, but of being out there on the lawn at Tanglewood, watching, in my mind, thousands and thousands and thousands of people all loving a concert experience have stuck with me because they're a reminder of what we can do. They're a reminder that out there, amidst all the bad news and the orchestra's closing or the orchestra's, not having money to do this and that, there are these places, and again, now it's just a memory, but of masses of people, of so many human beings that love what we do. They care about it. They live for it. They travel for it. It was just and people have built these magical experiences where that can be heard and shared, and that's inspiring. Like, there's a moment you don't need to just freak out about the future, and you can just, they did exist and they will exist, and we can build towards the things that are great and that we know are great.
So that actually is a nice little segue. We're coming to the end of our time.
Oh,
which I lament greatly.
Oh yeah.
And one of my favorite questions. My favorite question to ask at the end of these interviews is what's next? But I'll tailor it a little bit too. I want to know not only what's next for you, just project wise, and what's on your mind and your heart, but also what's next in your mind for the orchestra at large, not just Louisville, but the entity that is an orchestra.
What's next? I think that we're all going to, I know I just said this big thing about finding that time to just be yourself and everything like that. But the whole point of doing that, like the whole point of going on a retreat or, going to one of these artist colonies or something like that, is to have that time so that you can come back to the world and confront it as it really is. So like Tanglewood was like that for me. And then I came back to the real world. I had things that I held on to and tried to work towards. We're all going to have to change and grow in ways that are both exciting and fun and also very uncomfortable. And our world has been very resistant to that. We've fallen in love with our systems. We've fallen in love with our organizations, sometimes beyond the ability to actually do things differently. And this world is not going back to normal. Parts of it may resemble the previous world, but these two giant events that we're dealing with, the COVID crisis and America's disastrous response to it, and then the entire racial equity movement, are game-changing events. It's, of the magnitude of the world wars, of the Civil War, of the civil rights movement, of these moments in our history as a country and beyond, to change things forever. And the people that I always say, the people that can be 6 months ahead in their minds, not 20 years, not Jules Verne 100 years ahead, not George Lucas ahead. That's science fiction. That's fun, and you can do some great things. But the people that can see 6 months ahead and lead us to where we need to go in 6 months are the ones that are going to have a place they'll have a big voice, they'll have a big platform, and they'll have a way of sharing their art or whatever it is they do, that will actually bring us to where we need to go. And that's the job of the artist. The artist has to actually see that place that's just ahead and guide us there. They can use it for good or evil. Let's not forget that. There are very dangerous ways of using that power. But seeing things only for what they are right now will leave us desperate and hopeless. Seeing things too far into the future will not be intelligible to us. We can't understand things that far off. It's why so many composers are left, for future generations to understand. They were just too far, but or just luck didn't work. But I'm just saying, what's next is that we need to look at this world and then see ahead to that moment, whether it's 6 months or whatever that period is that we can understand, and then guide ourselves there. I can't tell you the specifics because it's different for each of us. It's different for each of the places that we're in, and it's different for each version of history that might unfold. It's changing every day. A new whole set of timelines is created by everybody's decisions, so to speak. And that's what I recommend for all of us. Don't dwell on the failings of the present, but don't just wallow in a lost future either. Think about where we need to go and then start leading us there. And I know that's a tall order for musicians and orchestras because we're used to just being comfortable and recreating things, but we're going to have to do that to have some more than relevance. You can't even be relevant right now. Now you need to be vital. And that's where I believe we all need to go. And that work is going to be very, very hard. And it's, as I said, no one way to do it. You're going to have to look within yourselves. But when you find out an answer, pursue it. Don't stop. Just do it. Go to the ends of the earth to make that happen, and see if you can do it in a way that changes something. And when you realize that you can, then you'll probably want to do more. So that's what I recommend. That's my big enjoinder here.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing yourself and your time, your enthusiasm, your passion, your wisdom. It has been a treat to talk with you.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. I hope this was helpful. I hope this wasn't too crazy or scary. Sometimes, especially when I cut this hair. See, look, if all these same things were said by somebody who looked more like that, wouldn't that be better? I look a little like a crazy person. It's like a Nostradamus type, but I'm trying to at least be helpful, even if it's a little crazy sounding. So.
Well, we appreciate everything that you've shared with us, and thank you to all of you who have watched all of these 8 weeks. Thanks for being with us. And Teddy, I hope you have a great night.
You too. Thank you so much.
Take care.
All right, bye.